A very good evening and welcome to Newsline Prime, coming to you live as always from the Newsfirst studios here in Colombo. Of course, your usual host Farah Shaukat Ali is out for the day. I'm Charlene Benedict and I will be sitting in for him today. The Constitution of Sri Lanka, since the inception of this government, it was amended once, that is the 19th Constitutional Amendment. But since then, there has been much controversy surrounding the Constitution of Sri Lanka. Now, if anyone asks why that should be important to the general public, which is you and me, the simple question and the obvious answer to that question is that that is the supreme law that governs you and me. So that is definitely going to affect the everyday lives of the general public and how we function on a day-to-day basis in this country. Now, to unravel the issues that surround the 19th Constitutional Amendment as well as the 18th Constitutional Amendment highlighted by President Maithripala Sirisena recently, we've got in our studios just the right man for the job. Before I introduce him by name, his reputation does precede him. He was a former Sri Lankan ambassador and also former permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. He's also notably one of the draftsmen of the 17th Constitutional Amendment here in Sri Lanka. Attorney at Law D.L. Mendis, a very good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charlene.
Mr. Mendis, speaking about the 18th and 19th Constitutional Amendment, I believe first it's important that we understand the underlying issues that make these two amendments to the Constitution so problematic. Starting from the beginning, the 18th Constitutional Amendment came first. What are the core issues that surround this amendment?
The core issues are that the 18th Amendment made a paradigm shift from the depoliticization of independence commissions. They establish what is called a parliamentary council.
Right.
That's one of the main issues. Whether it was good or bad, I will not discuss at this moment. Then they also limited the presidency to 2 terms.
The 18th Constitution?
18th Amendment, yes.
Right. I believe it extended the...
extended.
They removed the limit
and extended for unlimited number of terms.
Exactly.
So long as people want somebody, they could be in power.
So one person could be in power forever?
Forever. So that was a very contentious issue at the time of the elections. Probably it is not anyhow to the benefit of the ruling party at the time.
Right.
So these are the 2 main issues. Apart from that, there were few other issues which are not of much significance. These 2 issues had some impact on our constitutional system. And there was no attempt in the 18th Amendment to turn into a parliamentary system of government.
So technically the 18th Amendment strengthened the executive presidency that was in the country to a point where it almost became moved a little bit away from a democracy.
Yes, you can say so, but at the same time...
into a little bit of an autocracy.
Autocracy. And in that sense, it was in a way rejected by the people, as I see it from the elections in 2015. Then the 19th Amendment was very different from the 18th. It put the clock back again, brought the independence commissions back again. That was came into force with the 17th Amendment, and in addition they made a few more changes to the independent commissions, and also they made an attempt to transform it from a presidential system to a parliamentary system of government, but unfortunately it didn't work out because such a transformation required a referendum, and the government at the time was not willing to go the whole hog to change this referendum. So he was in a halfway house, and it did not anyhow to the good functioning of the 1978 constitution.
In your expert opinion, sir, why do you think that the government at the time, which is the government of good governance, which is currently in power as well, did not want to go for a referendum? Were they of the opinion that the people would reject this proposal?
Perhaps they had a little doubt, and they thought through this mechanism, at some point or the other, they can turn this into a parliamentary system of government.
Right.
But the 78 constitutions had certain inherent problems because, as Dr. N.M. Pereira said in his first lectures and his book, if the president is from one party and the prime minister is from another party, the constitution might lead to a deadlock. He called it the piquant situation,
right,
or sour situation, and we have seen that from the time of
which is exactly what happened. Which is exactly what we're experiencing right now.
For a long time now, we have reached almost the zenith of it at the moment, where they seem to be at loggerheads on. Although President was given full support of the UNF government, so this constitutional problem was unfortunately not addressed by the 18th Amendment to the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It lingered on. Perhaps our problems would have been much better if they addressed that issue in a number of ways, so that the president and prime minister could work together. Some provisions should have been included in the 19th Amendment so that there could have been more harmonious operation, irrespective whether he was elected with the support of the UNP or not. Those provisions should have been even an interim constitution if their long-term project was to transform into Westminster model. Now this has created problems, and the whole 19th Amendment came more or less to a standstill due to this crisis situation.
So you have under your belt decades of expertise in legislative drafting. As I mentioned before, you were a draftsman of the 17th Constitutional Amendment. Why weren't you included in the process of drafting the 19th Constitutional Amendment?
Sorry, I was not included because I came a little late from overseas. I was legislative counsel to the CARICOM Secretariat, and I was in charge of 17 countries drafting laws. But in Sri Lanka, if you enter into the fray a little late, they keep you out forever. This is the way they look at things. I could have contributed very much.
So when you say they kept you out, who do you really mean?
People, not the politicians, people around politicians. You know, those are the people who are a little bit jealous to secure their positions. In regard to matters of this nature, they will not allow anybody else to intervene in these matters, because more you have expertise, it's better in the long run, because I'm not going to take somebody else's position, but I will only air my views as to the best way to draft, because this whole thing is a drafting problem.
So now I'm pretty sure when it came to the drafting of the 17th Constitutional Amendment, you would have presented an initial draft, reviewed it, then amended it again, reviewed it again. That process continues over and over again. Now, the main reason for having such a process is that issues can be identified through that process. Now, when it came to the 19th Constitutional Amendment, we saw it being passed in Parliament overwhelmingly. I believe there was only one member of Parliament who did not vote for it, so it passed Parliament with about 223 votes in favour. Why weren't these issued realised at the time, when it really mattered, when it could have made a difference?
Let me tell you, the process, drafting process, was very different in the 17th and the 19th amendments. 17th, I had a beautiful presentation of an NGO document, which was done by the Marga Institute, in regard to depoliticization of the main organs of government.
Right.
Then this draft is more like I should say, this document was more like a cabinet memorandum to me. And when Mr. Honorable Karo Jayasuri called me and said, can you read this through and whether you can convert or transform what is said in this document into draft form of an amendment to the Constitution. That was the 78 Constitution. His idea was to reduce the powers of the President because he could have to act on the recommendation of these commissions, you know, and certain ways he had to make decision along with the members of the Council. So I stuck to this particular document, and I drafted. Every time I draft 1 or 2 chapters, I send it to Mr. Choksi, and he goes through it very nicely, and he sent me back in the same envelope, writing his comments and to how to develop it further in accordance with the recommendations made in this matter. And the cabinet at the time, the UNP was in the opposition, they went through it on and off along with in the development of the process. So it was not a long-winded process, and at the time I was working for the ICRC as a legal advisor. Sometimes you might not agree, or you might not believe that some of the provisions of the 17th Amendment was drafted in Jaffna, because I had to go for dissemination of IHL to the forces, and I took this opportunity to take the drafts there so that it was easy for me, and it was calm and quiet in the night, and I was undisturbed. Then I was able to work like a beaver on the draft, and it was done in quick time. And Mr. Honorable Karo Jayasuri was very pleased that it was done before the target dates, and I thought it might be an academic exercise, but for my surprise, legislative drafting and drafting process is like a cricket match. You don't know how it unfolds. Suddenly it became popular, and the whole parliament supported, and it went through the parliamentary process. It was enacted in 2001. So that was a structured draft, so it was much easier. It was not borrowed from Nepal, it was not initiated by anyone, it was initiated by the UNP in opposition, and it was taken then to various comments by various organizations, and later on it went through committee stage amendments, sometimes which I didn't agree, some of them were not so good, but created some problems. But it went through Parliament, and it was certainly a paradigm shift in reducing the powers of the President. It achieved its purpose. So I'm very happy that I was given opportunity to do this in my own country.
But when I see you speaking about the 17th Constitutional Amendment, you sound confident about it. You are confident about the draft, confident about the provisions in the 17th Constitutional Amendment. But however, the people who spearheaded the drafting of the 19th Constitutional Amendment, specifically people like Jayampati Vikramaratne, they do not seem confident about the draft. They themselves came out and said that the 19th Constitutional Amendment is flawed. Where does that take our country?
Yes, that is because the process is not right. Yeah, the process is not right. I remember in Trinidad and Tobago, when the Prime Minister decided to have a Republican Constitution, he wrote himself a book called Thinking Things Through. And he put this up to the people to think for themselves. Here we went on a jaunt, appointed committees, commissions, people's councils. I mean, it took an enormous time of amount, and some of the people appointed to these positions were political appointments. They have never read a book on constitutional law, or they didn't have any expertise in legislative drafting. You need, as Sir John Moore said once, a former First Parliamentary Council of England, that to be a draftsman you take 10 years. So people who are not even drafted a piece of legislation can't draft overnight, because these matters involve drafting.
It's an art.
It is art, and the draftsman is not simply a scribe. He is an institutional designer. He knows where to put the amendment, where to put the section, and he participates in the policy making process, as I said earlier. So he is not a scribe or a clerk. He's over the years developed certain techniques.
Right.
So I found that this process did not include any of those people at the initial stages. So they should be in the initial stages to form the policy, and because there was no policy document. It went step by step in an elongated manner without reaching the goal. They had a goal, they changed the goal. First of all, they must find what the goal is.
None of them even know what the goal is
What
now.
the goal is now. So naturally you have a draft. From here and there you will find some absurdities appearing. And when you were to work for a longer period, there will be more absurdities coming up, because there was no coherence in the scheme, in achieving a greater relationship with the president, if it's not going for a Westminster model, and eradicate those issues which create problems in the implementation process of the Constitution. That was not done.
Speaking about the absurdity of this amendment, it didn't take too much time for it to reveal itself, because it's only been about 3 years since the amendment was passed, and we've already had the constitutional deadlock, and certain issues that cropped up with this amendment can also be attributed to the failure in defense in the country with regard to the recent attacks as well. Mr. Mendis, speaking about the reduction in the powers of the president, we're working for a transition from an executive presidential system to a parliamentary system. Despite the debate that surrounds the advantages and disadvantages of having an executive presidential system or a parliamentary system, the powers that were reduced from the president through the 19th Amendment, how much of an issue has this caused to the country?
Practically, 19th Amendment, those reduction of powers were already there in the 17th. They reproduced the 17th Amendment, lock, stock and barrel in the 19th Amendment. So this is nothing new.
But they transitioned a couple of additional powers to the Prime Minister.
They gave additional powers to the Prime Minister. They did a little immunities. Did away with. And they did few things, but the core issue that the president still remain head of the government, head of state and head of the cabinet. So that was
head of the armed
forces. So president still rule the roost. Still, it is a presidential system.
Right.
We didn't cross the Rubicon from that to the parliamentary system. So they should have known that until and unless a referendum is taken, they should prepare first of all for harmonious exercise between the Prime Minister and the President to achieve some kind of rapport in the existing constitutional system, which was identified from the beginning.
So would you agree with me if I told you that the 19th Constitutional Amendment has caused an irreconcilable damage as far as the doctrine of separation of powers go between the executive and the legislature?
Yes, of course. The separation of powers is a grundnorm in constitution making, and it is discussed at length in the Latimer House principles. It has been there long from the time immemorial, from Montesquieu to present writers.
Right.
But then the way it was incorporated into the 19th Amendment is not very desirable, because if the president could be impeached by Parliament, the Prime Minister, the President should also have power to dissolve Parliament.
Right.
But then I'm not going to comment on how it was interpreted, but they felt that the 33C is not enough for the president to dissolve parliament.
Before 4.5 years.
4.5 years. Whereas the parliament also
can impeach the president at any time.
Anytime. So then also giving powers to parliament to dissolve the parliament itself, to the parliamentarians, with 2/3 majority before 4.5 years.
Okay.
It will not happen. That piece of
it's not a practical provision.
You don't destroy yourself when you have a free lunch in parliament and with perks and all that, and pension in 5 years. So who is going to destroy all that? So it is not a workable solution. So this is why it came to loggerheads, and the whole 19th Amendment became a little critical among some people, because it did not deal with this separation of powers in an intelligent manner. And the courts, I believe, they were trapped. They will have to interpret the law with the 33C
based on a flawed amendment.
For drafting, in a sense, that amendment which did not conceptualize but should actually go into the mechanics of separation.
Did not conceptualize the intention of parliament.
Parliament, yes. They may have the intention. I can't say whether they had it or not. I can't want to comment at this point. But what the end product was, that there was imbalance or disproportionality in the powers between the president and the legislature, headed by the prime minister.
Shortly after the passage of the 19th constitutional amendment, the entire parliament, although many of the general public don't remember right now, given the other issues that Sri Lanka is facing currently, the entire parliament was converted into a constitutional assembly that would hopefully draft the next constitution of Sri Lanka. Do you believe that this was a wise move, given the reputation of the Parliament of Sri Lanka?
I think it is a little unproductive thing to spend all your parliamentary time for 5 years in making constitutions, because constitution is only one aspect of the development process. But to contribute or devote the entire parliamentary life to constitution making, I feel it is ridiculous. So if you had prepared the drafts prior to the elections, you should have pushed it through very as quickly as possible and get the referendum from the people. It would have been set and match. But they dragged the process to such a long time. People got tired at the end of the day.
Well, the sessions of the Constitutional Assembly were broadcasted live.
It was,
you would have watched a few of the discussions.
It was utterly mediocre reigns there. When I listened to the constitution making processes in other third world countries, I began to realize how fortunate I am to watch them. They come well prepared to Parliament with books and passages flagged, and they speak for 3-4 hours, and I was educated by watching them. But here I didn't see that type of debate going on in the constitution making process. So it should have been open rather to the constitutional and legal experts instead of taking it to all and sundry and doing that process, which Prime Minister of Trinidad avoided by writing the book called Thinking Things Through for the people to understand first before eliciting their views, because they must be educated on the subject. People who have never ruled a country or who have now dealt with these matters cannot honestly advise you. And the people who are appointed we have never read or taught or done any work on constitutional making or drafting. So it at the end of the day, it came to a grinding halt.
Well, sir, as Shakespeare said, however, what's done cannot be undone. Where do we move from here?
Oh, moving is very important. The time for a Westminster model has come and gone, my dear. Now we need to be very sure, I'm sure, the way we are going is we will have the presidential system continued, and we are getting ready for a presidential election. So what we need is to address the defects of the existing 78 Constitution as amended by the 18th and the 19th and come up with some changes to the Constitution. And there are a number of changes I can give you off the cuff.
Right.
One is to settle the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister. There are lovely provisions which are put in the Guyana Constitution, where they have the same system and sovereignty of the people, not only in here. So we could do certain transplants and adapt and dovetail these provisions to bring some harmony between the two. Then we must also address the doctrine of separation of powers in a more intelligent way.
Right.
And either give the President cannot dissolve Parliament for 2.5 years, and the Parliament can't impeach the President for another 2.5 years.
It must go both ways.
Both ways, and then say you can only do it with the concurrence of the judiciary. If the judiciary thinks that what you are doing is correct, they will allow you. If he thinks what you are doing is wrong, they will not allow you.
So more checks and balances.
And bring also the other senior partner or junior partner into play. All three organs must play a role in preserving both sovereignty of the Parliament as well as separation of powers. That's how H.L. De Silva wrote a fantastic article some years ago. It has ingrained in my mind, and I continue to see the concept of sovereignty and the concept of separation of powers as belonging to all three organs of
So these are all very very forward-thinking proposals that you are making, but however, the general public of this country will have to make a decision in a few short months as to either who they are going to appoint as the president of this country, the next president, or if it is a general election, who they are going to elect to Parliament to represent their views and their needs. Any piece of advice? We're in the final few minutes of our show. Any piece of advice that you can give our general public?
Whoever is appointed has to do certain fundamentals, constitutional fundamentals. What I describe is one fundamental. They must also include right to life.
Right.
And also I feel there's a great debate going on that the executive enters into treaties today, and the Parliament itself is not placed before Parliament, which I feel does not happen in many countries. In most Commonwealth countries, where they follow the dualist approach to international treaties and agreements.
But however, that issue is addressed when you need enabling legislation.
Enabling legislation, but that is after the
whole treaty is
entered into force. So you are bound
under international law, you are bound.
Before that, Parliament must play a role in international relations. Today, even in these countries, there are constitutional provisions saying that before ratification, the Parliament, the treaty should be placed before Parliament. That's called in England the Ponsonby rule. Lord Ponsonby was a great man who was advocating good governance in England under Ramsay MacDonald government. So that came to be the practice of the parliamentary process. Today, we don't even care two hoots. It still goes without the concurrence of the Parliament. So, and these big treaties are going to change the future of Sri Lanka. So if sovereignty is your grundnorm of your constitution, it must come to Parliament as well. Even if you have not read a single word of the treaty, it must be approved by Parliament.
Must be presented in
Parliament. It should be ratification of treaties, like I have done for a couple of countries in Africa and the Caribbean. they get any treaty which affects the sovereignty, territorial integrity, not all treaties, which affects expenditure from the consolidated fund or amends basic principles of law, must be approved by Parliament.
Speaking of these treaties and agreements with other countries that would affect the sovereignty of the country, of course, two treaties that are in the public discourse right now and that we cannot forget are the SOFA and the AXA agreements, of course. Unfortunately, sir, we do not have time to discuss that on today's show as we have come to the end of it. Thank you very much, sir. It was a very productive discussion with you. Of course, an expert in the field. We do hope that responsible officials, if they are tuned into this show right now, will take note of certain proposals made by Attorney at Law D.L. Mendis, who is an expert in the field, and work towards doing all that is required to ensure the sovereignty of the country. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on our show today.
Pleasure indeed.
And also thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in. Of course, for the latest in the political arena here in Sri Lanka, you know where you should tune in. Newsline, that's where. I'm Charlene Benedict, and that's it for today. Until we meet next time, take care and God bless.